There's another type of evolution that I do not agree with, and that's called macroevolution. It's the theory that all forms of plant and animal life are descended from earlier and simpler forms of life with no need for a creator. That's macroevolution. That's what I do not hold to, and certainly many other scientists do not hold to. It's never been observed. We've never seen it. We have never seen any mutation or change over time that has led to a new phyla or new development of some new organism. We've never seen it. It's never been observed. But it's the theory that says, well, since we see all the diversity and God cannot be an answer, we must find a natural way to explain this without referring to God. So God is always left out of the picture. God is never brought in. And macroevolution is the theory that is demanded for all the diversity that we see today. Here, let me review again. Microevolution, it's a change within kinds. Macroevolution is a change of kinds, that ultimately a reptile becomes a bird and can fly. That's just one example, but this has to happen millions of times over billions of years for evolution to be true. Without any direction, without any intelligence leading it or guiding it. Here's the next thing. Microevolution is a change within one kind of bird, for example, that we see that. A change from a reptile to bird, didn't happen. Many fossils to support microevolution, that there are little adaptations within organisms, like length of beak, that sort of thing. But macroevolution, no fossil support. Homology is not fossil support. Evolutionists keep pointing to homology. An ape is like a human. See, that's a transition. No, it's not. That's a fully developed biological organism. It's not something changing. There's no fossil of something changing in the middle of development. No support for macroevolution. It does occur today, microevolution, and I'll show you a video in just a second. It does not occur today. You would think that if evolution was such a powerful force, and that's how evolutionists describe evolution, this is such a powerful force, you underestimate the power of natural selection. Why can't we find just one example of evolution happening today, anywhere in the biological world? You would think at least somewhere one organism would be still evolving, would be in the midst of evolving, developing some new feature. It's not. We can't find any. It's not occurring today. It's not been observed. Remember, scientists weren't there when the earth was created. They're looking back at what they think is billions of years trying to figure it out. And they're getting it wrong. Here's the next thing. Microevolution can be observed. Macroevolution cannot be observed. Microevolution is scientific in that we can observe it, we can test it, we can see it. Macroevolution is not scientific. It's unscientific in that it cannot be observed. It's not testable. We're not seeing it. We can't bring it into the laboratory. And let me say this, even though scientists have tried in the laboratory to bring about some sort of evolution in organisms, they have never succeeded, even when a scientist is trying to make it happen. They can't make it happen because God powerfully designed in DNA this ability to stay within the kind. It just doesn't work to cross over to another kind or another family of animals. The Galapagos Island finches are a powerful example of that. When you go to the Galapagos Island, there are finches that are there, and these changes in their beaks are noticed. And there are some finches with large beaks that when the drought comes, because of their large beaks, they can get to food that the other finches with the smaller beaks cannot get to, and they die off. So what happens when a finch with a small beak dies off? Can't give birth to baby finches, right? Can't. When they die off, they can't give birth to baby finches. But the ones with the large beaks who are living in this drought and who can get to the food that they need to survive can give birth. And of course, their baby birds are like them with the bigger beaks. And all of a sudden, you find that there are more birds with the larger beaks and less with the smaller beaks. Now, you're going to see a film clip that basically says that this is the most powerful example of evolution found to date. Do you get that? This is the most powerful example of evolution to date. I don't believe it's evolution at all. It's the fact that birds with larger beaks lived, and their numbers increased, so the average size of the beak, because their numbers increased on the island, increased. And the ones that had small beaks and couldn't get to the food during times of drought, they died off and, of course, couldn't give birth to baby birds, couldn't lay those eggs, couldn't happen, and their numbers decreased. That's adaptation. That's not evolution. But you'll see a clip in this movie that I'm going to show you that says this is the most powerful evidence for the power of evolution to date. If this is the best they've got, folks, they're hurting. They're hurting. And the first scientist you're going to see, Ken Miller, is an avid proponent of evolution. But he just doesn't present the facts clearly, I think. Let's watch this video.
In 1994, journalist Jonathan Weiner published The Beak of the Finch, a book about research into the Galapagos finches. It won the Pulitzer Prize. Weiner argued that the finches represent the best and most detailed demonstration to date of the power of Darwin's process. Similar claims are made in many biology textbooks.
The Galapagos finches are a spectacular example of evolution. When the food quality, in other words, the kind of food that was available, changed as a result of a drought or a particularly rainy year or something like that, over the course of just a couple of years, they could see dramatic changes in the beak sizes in various populations. Natural selection can drive changes of a structure, like the beak, in one direction in response to selective pressure, not just fast enough to account for what would be required for Darwin's theories, but actually 50 to 100 times faster than that.
A severe drought could cause many of the finches to die and leave only those with larger beaks. So in the following generation, the average beak size was increased. And some textbooks extrapolate this over 200 years or so and say that a few of these events strung together could transform these finches into a new species by making their beaks larger.
Look, the stuff about finch beaks is certainly interesting. Let's not confuse ourselves about that. The question is, can it be extrapolated, or does it represent cyclic variation?
What the books fail to mention is that as soon as the rains came back, the average beak size returned to normal. There was no net evolution. What we're really seeing is just one species oscillating back and forth with no real evolutionary change. So the evidence is exaggerated to make it appear to support Darwin's theory in a way that it really doesn't.
The contrary may be true. We may be seeing the development of entirely new species. The Galapagos finch starts off as a finch, and within 100 million years there'll be a Galapagos elephant. Could be. But we need a whole lot more by way of evidence than a couple of nutty journalists going down there looking at finch beaks and writing a Pulitzer Prize winning book. A whole lot more if this is to be serious science. I mean, this doesn't even pass the threshold of anecdote. Finch beaks change in size. Yeah, they do. They change in shape too. It seems to be correlated with seasons. There seems to be a regress back toward the mean when the seasons change again. If this is the part of a spectacular evolutionary extrapolation, let's have additional reasons for thinking that.
The changes are temporary, they oscillate back and forth, and they don't go anywhere. So, as evidence for the origin of species, Darwin's finches really don't work.
Critics of Darwin's theory say that finch beaks provide a good example of microevolution, small changes within a species or gene pool. But it does not by itself provide evidence for macroevolution, which is the origin of fundamentally new organisms and body plans.
When we look at dogs, no matter how far back we go, it's dogs. When we look at bacteria, no matter what we do, they stay bugs. They don't change in their fundamental nature. There seems to be some sort of an inherent species limitation, and we have no good explanation for this in terms of a Darwinian theory. We should have far more flexibility, far more plasticity under laboratory conditions than we actually do if Darwinian theory or anything like that were correct.
All right, so there you get an overview of a couple of scientists, Jonathan Wells, David Berlinski, who's not a believer, he's not a creationist, but obviously a very intelligent scientist who really doubts that evolution could happen. Now let me go over a few things. Evolution has its foundation in naturalism. Everything in the known universe is a product of natural events. No concept of deity. Evolution explains everything from naturalism. We don't need God. We're not going to use God. We can't use God. That's their rule. Evolution claims three essentials for all forms of life we see today. The first is time. They need lots of it. The numbers are always changing, but I think the latest numbers are that the Big Bang happened 15 billion years ago. The Earth appeared about 4.5 billion years ago, and life began about 3.5 billion years ago. Those numbers are always kind of flexible and changing because they need a lot of time for evolution to work.